Okay, I think we're...
Yeah, we're live on YouTube now.
Okay, great. Did you want to do your spiel, or do you want me to do mine, or?
Yeah, I can start with mine.
Sure, sounds good.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cannabis Legislation and Policy Study Recommendations Public Open House. My name is Mackenzie Cece. I'm joined here with our open house hosts, and Lindsay, I'll leave the formal introductions to you. We know that this may be a new experience for many of you attending via Zoom, so we appreciate your patience and understanding, and we will be getting started shortly. At this time, you can hear myself and the open house hosts, but we cannot hear or see you yet. And when your speaker number does come up, you will be invited to speak as a panelist with all of our open house hosts this evening. Tonight, we have 7 registered speakers, and we will begin with speaker number 1 and move onwards. And if you did not register and receive a speaker number this evening, you will have an opportunity to speak after all of the registered participants have spoken, if time permits. And at that time, we will give you instructions on how to raise your virtual hand. You will have up to 10 minutes to ask questions and or provide comments. And I will be providing a reminder at the 1-minute mark and will notify you when your 10 minutes is up. And if you still wish to ask questions or provide comments at the end of your 10 minutes, you will have an opportunity to do so if time permits after all the registered participants have spoken. Please note that this video will be recorded and live streamed on YouTube. And if you have any issues, please feel free to email me. You should have my email as you would have received registration information from me. So I'll pass it over to you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Mackenzie. I'd just like to welcome everyone and thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. My name is Lindsay Richardson, and I'm the Senior Community Planner with the town of Fort Erie. First off, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you that have visited the Let's Talk Fort Erie website, completed the cannabis survey. A second survey is now available, so if you haven't done this yet, I encourage you to visit the Let's Talk Fort Erie website to complete that. It just went live yesterday. We've been having a couple minor issues with Let's Talk Fort Erie, but I think we've sort of got it sorted out, and everything should be up and running now on the site. And again, just to remind everyone that Let's Talk Fort Erie site is sort of our main source of communication. And it includes all of the background information, frequently asked questions. It will have a copy of this presentation up hopefully tomorrow morning, as well as links to all of the other various government documents that are sort of related to cannabis. We do try to update it regularly, so please make sure you do have a look around, and remember to click on Stay Informed, the link at the bottom of the page, to ensure that you're kept up to date on the study work that we're doing. The purpose of this particular open house is to review the recommendations that have resulted from the research and background study work that's been completed to date. I'll emphasize that there's no actual official plan or zoning changes that are happening at this time. These are just general recommendations to guide future amendments. I'm joined tonight by Mackenzie Cece from the town, who most of you have probably already spoken with, as well as Paul Lowe's and Suzanne McDonald from SGL Planning and Design Inc., who will be giving a brief presentation shortly. Once the presentation is complete, as Mackenzie noted, we'll be opening the virtual floor to those who wish to speak. Registered speakers will have up to 10 minutes. And once we've gone through that list, if time permits, we'll open up the floor to anyone else who wishes to speak. Just as an additional side note for this evening, similar to our last public meeting, we will not be focusing on or able to provide responses or comments responses to comments, questions, or concerns as they relate to illegal grow-ops or the federal legislation that permits the growth or retail sale of cannabis. These are not topics that are within the scope of the study work that we're focused on. We do appreciate that there are concerns around these issues. However, this study is only examining the legislation and policy around legal and licensed commercial cannabis operations and the planning tools the town can put in place to regulate these as a land use. If you do have concerns relating to illegal grow-ops, and or the federal legislation, please feel free to contact me directly or through Let's Talk Fort Erie, and I'll ensure that your comments are passed on to the appropriate contacts. I am going to turn this meeting over to Suzanne and Paul at this time. And again, I thank all of you for your participation. We do really value the input that you can provide. So without further ado, Suzanne, I will let you take it away.
Thank you, Lindsay. Just going to screen share my presentation. Lindsay, can you just confirm that you can see that all right?
I can see that perfectly. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. As Lindsay mentioned, I'll be doing a brief presentation on the cannabis legislation and policy study that we've been undertaking on behalf of the town of Fort Erie. So just to take a step back, I wanted to quickly go over what our study purpose is. So we are looking to examine opportunities for the town to regulate activities permitted under the Cannabis Act, specifically the commercial growing and production of cannabis within the town. So as part of this, and the focus of my discussion tonight will be recommending changes to the town's official plan and zoning bylaw in order to regulate cannabis as a land use. So the scope of our project specifically includes land uses related to the commercial cultivation and processing of recreational and medical cannabis. Two things that are outside the scope of our study include the personal growth of recreational cannabis within the home. In a dwelling, up to 4 plants can be grown. The other thing that we're not looking at is the retail sale of recreational cannabis in a standalone store. I will be speaking a little bit about retail sales where it's part of facility, but standalone stores on their own is not something that we're looking at as part of the study. In terms of our study process, we're in the 3rd phase of our study. Phase 1 included a background review. Phase 2 included coming up with a number of policy options and reviewing pros and cons of each of these. And we are now in phase 3, which is the policy recommendations. The next phase would be phase 4, would be implementation of any of these recommendations, such as, for example, an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment. But as Lindsay mentioned, right now we're just focused on the recommendations. The actual implementation tools would be worked on the next phase. So just in terms of a little bit of background of the work that we've done so far, we reviewed the legal cannabis framework within Canada, as well as looked at relevant provincial documents, including the provincial policy statement and the Farming and Food Production Act. And I also wanted to mention that the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks recently released a land use guideline that relates to sensitive land uses and industry. This is a draft guideline for review and for comment at this stage, and it does address cannabis. And I just wanted to mention that this is something that we are aware of and are looking at as part of this study. Other things that we looked at as part of our background review include a review of the Fort Erie planning tools, as well as a review of what other municipalities have done with regards to cannabis as a land use in their, for example, official plans and zoning bylaws. As I mentioned, we also looked at different options for regulating the use and looked at pros and cons of these. And also, as part of the study, we've had some previous public engagement, including an online survey and a previous open house that was held virtually as well. A little bit of background on the legal framework of cannabis within Canada. This is the production of cannabis is regulated by the federal government. So in order to produce cannabis on a commercial scales, an applicant or a person or corporation would have to seek a license from the government of Canada, and a number of different licenses can be applied for, as is shown here. So there's cultivation licenses, processing, sale for medical purposes, which occurs through the mail, analytical testing and research, and an individual or corporation can apply for multiple of these licenses at one time. So someone might, for example, apply for a cultivation and processing license. You'll note that sale to the general public is not listed here, and that's because that is not run by the federal government, but that's authorized by the provincial government. So that's why it's not listed on this slide, because it's done through a separate system. So as I mentioned, we reviewed the town's planning tools, including a review of the current official plan. So the current official plan does address medical marijuana within its policies. This was introduced through official plan amendment number 18. And this official plan permits this use in the agricultural, rural, and open space designations, as well as the industrial business park designation. And also there is a policy within the official plan that this use be subject to site plan control, as well as that this planning for this land use have regard for the Ministry of Environment's D6 guidelines in determining appropriate separation distances, as well as the necessity for more detailed compatibility studies. We also looked at the town's zoning bylaw, which currently does define medical marijuana and grow production facility. The definition is listed here on my slide. And I'll just note that it mentions the marijuana for medical purposes regulations, which were the previous regulations that permitted this use before the Cannabis Act came into effect. So the existing information in the planning tools is based on previous regulations. So this use, that is a defined term, is currently permitted in the agricultural, rural, industrial, and prestige industrial zones. It's listed specifically as a permitted use. And then also because the definition of agricultural use includes this use, through their agricultural permissions, it's also permitted in the extractive industrial, existing open space, and hazard zones as well. We also reviewed the site plan control bylaw, and currently the whole town is subject to site plan control. And this site plan control bylaw also specifically requires a site plan control for medical marijuana grow and production facilities. So throughout this process and the work that we've done so far, there have been some concerns that have been raised with this use. The most common concern raised is related to odor. That's one that was most prevalent in what we've heard. We've also heard concerns raised about groundwater, security, separation distances, and illegal growing. As I mentioned previously, we've undertaken a survey as part of this study. So I wanted to go through some of the results that we've undertaken, or sorry, some of the results that we got as part of the study. So one of the questions we asked was, should cannabis production, growing, and processing be permitted indoors in agricultural areas? And 54% of responses indicated that it should be permitted indoors in agricultural areas, with 33% saying no, and some being unsure. We also looked at whether cannabis production should be permitted indoors in industrial areas, and 80% indicated that cannabis production should be permitted indoors within industrial areas, with 13% saying no and 7% of respondents being unsure. And we also asked about outdoor cultivation, so growing only, and whether that should be permitted. And there was a bit more of a split here. 50% indicated that yes, outdoor growing should be permitted, while 47% indicated no, and some were unsure. We also asked a question about separation distances between a facility and a sensitive use, such as a residential zone or a residence or school. And 23 of the respondents indicated that an appropriate separation distance would be greater than 200 meters. And lastly, we asked what is the top concern when it came to cannabis production in the town. And again, here, as I mentioned earlier, the #1 concern is odor. Other concerns that were more common also included light pollution, groundwater, and security. And lastly, we asked if the land use should be subject to site plan control, which is an application process that allows the town to review and regulate features and characteristics of the site. And 83% of respondents indicated that this type of use should be subject to site plan control. So next I wanted to talk about our recommendations. So on a high level, first I'll talk about indoor cultivation. It is recommended that the town regulate both licensed facilities as well as designated medical growth. And I just want to explain a little bit more what I mean about that. So I mentioned earlier on in my presentation all the different types of licenses that can be applied from the federal government. So that's what I mean by the licensed facilities. There is another process for cannabis, in that if someone has a medical prescription for cannabis, they can register with Health Canada in order to be permitted to grow the requirements of their medical prescription for themselves. And there's also some rules around that actually allow up to 4 prescriptions to be grown together in one location. And so we're recommending also regulating where multiple prescriptions are being grown together, just because of the potential for nuisances related to that as a land use. So that's why I have 2 different things here. We're going to recommending regulating both the licensed facilities as well as where multiple prescriptions are being grown together in one location. And so as part of the skipped ahead. As part of our recommendations, we're looking at permitting these uses as of right in the agricultural and rural areas, as well as the industrial zone and prestige industrial zone, so that these would not need to go through a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment, but also requiring that it does go through a site plan control process. And at this time, we are not recommending the permission for outdoor cultivation or outdoor growing of cannabis, just on the basis that there's insufficient data relating to odor control of this as a land use. So in order to implement those recommendations, we're recommending changes to both the official plan and the zoning bylaw. So in terms of the official plan, we'd want to introduce a definition of cannabis uses, and one that includes both cultivation of cannabis, but as well as some of the accessory things that go along with that, such as processing, packaging, testing, etc. And we also would like to introduce requirements at the policy level that these land use occur within a wholly enclosed building, that it not emit any odor, that it operate pursuant to all applicable regulations, and that the use be appropriately distanced from sensitive land uses, such as your schools and your houses. And we'd also want to see a policy update that would require that this land use go through site plan control, as I mentioned, and may also require additional studies. We also recommend an update to the zoning bylaw to specifically address the use. And as I kind of explained earlier, we'd want to both define and permit not only the licensed cannabis production facilities, but also the dedicated medical growth of cannabis. And we also would want to update the definition of agricultural uses so that it does not include these facilities. They would be permitted separately under the zoning bylaw. And we'd also want to make sure that only indoor cultivation is permitted as of right. We'd also recommend introducing general provisions related to this use, and specifically requirements that there be a minimum separation distance for indoor operations of a minimum of 150 meters between the use and a sensitive land use. We'd prohibit outdoor storage. We'd require that the use be operated entirely within an enclosed building, prohibit the land use within a dwelling, and ensure that that there is a requirement in place that no odor be admitted. And again, the recommendation would be to list this use as a permitted use within the agricultural and rural zones, as well as the general industrial and heavy industrial zones. And I mentioned earlier accessory sales. So currently under the zoning bylaw, a typical industrial building would be permitted to grow what they produce on site on a limited area within that building. So this permission could be extended as well. So if a license were sought from the federal government to produce cannabis, as well as if the provincial requirements were met to also sell these as an accessory use within the facility, that would also be permitted in industrial areas. And lastly, we also recommend updates to the site plan control. So again, in the official plan, we'd want to specify that this type of use is subject to site plan control, and we want to ensure that there's permission to request a number of studies related to that. So whether that be air quality control studies, environmental impact studies, or lighting studies. And through this process, the town is able to request and review studies specific to odor or other concerns as appropriate, and that gives the opportunity for potential nuisances to be mitigated through that process. So just a quick overall summary of what our recommendations are. We would update the official plan to permit the use. We would recommend permitting the use indoor as of right in the agricultural, rural, industrial, and prestige industrial zones with the specific requirements that I outlined, such as the separation distance and the requirement for odor control, and then also make the use subject to site plan control. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you very much. And I'm going to pass it back to Lindsay.
Great, thank you, Suzanne. I appreciate that great presentation and lots of information. I'm going to actually pass it over, I think, to Mackenzie to bring in our first speaker.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. So I did want to let everyone know that we do have Councillor Luberts in the waiting room at this time. So I'd like to invite him in to provide any comments, and then we'll proceed with hearing from our registered speakers.
There he is. Hi, Councillor Lubert.
Hi, Mackenzie. How are you? Oh,
I'm good. How are you?
good, good. Yeah, I don't have any comments right now, but I do have a couple questions. I got in a little bit late, so I'm just wondering, are we just talking about commercial use of marijuana, or is this open house regulating personal growing?
Yeah, so I'll answer. The original intent of the study was to focus specifically on the licensed commercial facilities.
Okay.
However, as we worked through the study and some other similar studies, we've become aware of the potential for nuisance related to specifically medical personal growth and specifically where multiple prescriptions are grown together. So as part of this study, we are looking at regulating not individual personal medical growth, but where someone has designated someone else to grow for them and multiple prescriptions are being grown together.
Oh, okay, so this meeting is not going to affect the fact every resident can grow four marijuana plants at home on their own, indoors or outdoors.
That's correct.
That this is nothing to do with that.
That's correct.
That's okay, thanks. Can I continue on with another question? I'm not sure what slide it was, but you talked about outdoor uses. And you're not recommending that we allow for outdoor use. But what do we do with the operation on Lower Road that's already got approval? I don't know that they're in full operation. They're supposed to be growing greenhouses and stuff, but from what I understand, they're growing outdoors right now in the field. So how do we address that?
I can answer that. If it's already permitted under the zoning bylaw, then it becomes, if the zoning bylaw changes, then it becomes a legal non-conforming use. So they can continue operating if they're already operating legally under the zoning bylaw.
Yes, okay. But in their case, from what I can remember, that was supposed to be greenhousing from what I remember voting on, and they're doing it strictly in the field. So I'm just curious as to how that worked out.
So as I indicated, if they're operating legally under the zoning, then they can continue. If they're operating not according to their zoning, then that's a bylaw infringement.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I'm good with that then. Okay, I might have some questions later, but we'll continue on with everybody else.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Lubert. Appreciate those comments.
Great. So we'll be moving on to our first registered speaker this evening, who is John. So I will be just promoting John as a panelist. And just as a reminder, we are permitting up to 10 minutes to provide questions or ask any comments, and I will be providing reminders at the 1 minute mark and at the end of your 10 minutes.
Good
Hi, John.
afternoon. Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. I think I have more questions than things to say, but I'll just start by indicating my interest in the study that you've been working on, and ultimately what happens with it within the town of Fort Erie. Is as a resident concerned for just the the quality of life for myself and my neighbors. So that's my reason for being here and participating. And I appreciate the presentation that was shared, and certainly appreciate, although I understand it is only a recommendation at this point, but I appreciate the recommendation that grow operations be limited to indoors, regardless of the zoning that they would be permitted in. So I think that's encouraging, as is the recommendation to help manage odor as a part of the process. So thank you for that. I think that, as a comment, I would suspect that the type of building, then the type of enclosure would have to be more substantive than something like a greenhouse, because I don't think you could manage greenhouse growth without emitting odors. But I'll be curious to learn more about that as you get closer to presenting your recommendations to the town. I think that I'm not sure if there is a limitation on the distance, on the separation that was referenced earlier. I think you referenced 150 meters from, I've forgotten the term you used, but basically 150 meters between other properties or sensitive areas, including schools and so forth. And I don't know if I'd be curious to understand if that 150 meters is based on anything in particular. Is there some guidance on that was drawn from other situations that that it would be only 100 meters or could it be 500 meters, and what led to 150 meters as the distance? I'm kind of curious about that. So maybe I'll stop if I can at that and just better understand that component, if I may.
So the 150 meters was very much based on an extensive best practice review of looking at what other municipalities have in place. We did recognize that there is a bit of a range, but 150 meters was generally the most common setback, and it's my understanding that that is also a reasonable setback from an air quality perspective. If appropriate measures are in place, then that is a reasonable setback. That said, as part of this process, as part of any site plan process, the applicant or the person who would be interested in starting this use would have to show, or this town could ask them to show through that site plan process, what air quality mitigations were in place to make sure that that 150 meters is sufficient. I'm not sure if there's anything you wanted to add to that, Paul.
No, that's good.
Thank you. I think one of the areas that I'd like to share, and I'm not sure if it was captured during the last town hall as you're having now, or in the survey process. A couple of the things, and you'll be familiar with the previously approved site plan for Ridge Road North. One of the things that our neighborhood was concerned about when we attended an earlier presentation on the plan for that location was the comment that in order to satisfy the application process for the federal government, who would ultimately grant the growing license, that there were a number of things that the operator at the time was planning, and that included extensive use of security cameras throughout the property, and extensive use of security lighting around the clock throughout the property. And I'm not sure if that was the intent to protect the inventory or what the intent was, but that's an area that I just wanted to express remains a real concern for a group of neighbors on Ridge Road North. And while we may indeed be 150 meters away from where the facility could ultimately be built, I think there's a lot of concern around, privacy. What does that mean with cameras? Can they only be pointed at the facility, or can they be, directed outwards, and infringing on people's privacy within their own property? And then the other concern was the lighting. And so I know that other discussions on greenhouses has been the glow of the greenhouse. In this case, it was actually about the notion that the property would be lit up well throughout the night. And what would that mean to the 50 or so neighbors who surround this particular site plan? So it's a bit selfish. Obviously, I'm talking about the one location, but I'm thinking about it in terms of the broader implementation of what the town will ultimately do based on your study and recommendations. So I'm not sure if you can actually comment on those, but I wanted to share that those are some concerns from a rural residential perspective that myself and many neighbors around me have.
Yeah, I'll provide a comment unless Suzanne wants to go start first. Oh, okay. By requiring all applications to go through site plan approval and requiring things like odor studies and lighting studies, the municipality can then ensure that the lighting, which I completely understand in a rural setting, you don't want that lighting impacting on your enjoyment of your property. And so the site plan control can address lighting and can address and make sure there's no impact from lighting, and requiring the studies to demonstrate that. They might be able to deal with cameras, but any person can put on their property as many cameras as they want on their property. I don't think there's any way the municipality can stop that for anybody doing it, provided they're meeting the zoning requirements for a structure and setback of a structure. So I don't think there's anything the municipality can do to stop somebody putting security cameras up where they want. There may be more legal implications for recording people on public property, or on their own private property, but I don't know how we can deal with security cameras. I just want to be upfront on that aspect.
Right, I think in my case, I think I understand the concept of security cameras, and I think my concern was more about the neighbors that immediately surround the property, not wanting to be on camera and or potentially filmed, in their own backyard, so to speak. I think that was the concern. So I wanted to make sure at least we express that to the extent that the town, if they have the right to consider that, that would be appreciated. And I guess I think Councillor Luberts was asking a question that's kind of similar, perhaps, to one that I have. And I don't know if it's a fair question based on your knowledge of the existing locations that have approved site plans in Fort Erie.
And sorry, John, just to let you know, we're at the 1 minute before your 10 minutes is
great.
up. So
great. I'll finish up with this question. So with the site plans that have been approved thus far within the community, whether or not the operation has started, but the plans have been approved at that time. Do your recommendations that you're presenting to council, would all of the site plans that have been approved be in alignment with your recommendations, or are there those that are outside of the recommendations that you're presenting, if I can ask?
So I think I can probably answer that one. The site plans that have been approved sort of to date would fall under the old regulations that we had through the official plan amendment and the zoning from, I think it was 2014 that it happened. So I'd actually have to look at each of the individual ones and see sort of where they fall. I know that our guidelines and our regulations were pretty strong back then. So it's, I know through site plan, they do request the odor study to occur already. So there's certain things that we already were requesting. We're just sort of building on that with this stuff, but probably, so the short answer is probably not, because they would have fallen under the old regulations. But the changes that we're proposing are not all that much different from those old regulations.
Right.
These things are greater. So for example, the setback requirement that we used to have, or that we currently have, is sort of sitting at that 70-meter point, whereas now we're talking 150 perhaps. So some of the things are going to be a bit more stringent, but the current ones would fall under the current zoning and the current official plan policies.
Right. So just a quick follow on, and then I'll stop. So the 2014 bylaw that's referenced, or regulation, I don't know if it's a regulation or bylaw, was for medical marijuana. And today we've expanded, obviously, the scope to include the a broader ability to grow.
Mhm.
So the those who are grandfathered to 2014 would also be grandfathered restricted to medical?
It would, I guess it would depend on what license they got from the federal government. So I'm not sure I have a perfect answer for that. And the whole reason that we're doing this study work is to bring our policies into conformity with the new stuff that came out from the federal government. So it's, I don't have a perfect answer for that one. I'm not sure. Again, I'd have to look at their site plan and actually look at their license to see what they've been licensed for. But again, the changes that we're making are in response to the new policies that have come out.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So I will move on to our next speaker this evening. All right, so our next speaker is speaker number 2, who is a call-in user, Russ. So I will be allowing him to speak. And just as a reminder, you'll be provided up to 10 minutes to provide any comments or ask any questions. And I will be giving reminders at the 1 minute and 10 minute mark. Hi, Russ. Are you able to hear us?
Hi, Lindsay. Hi, Mackenzie.
Hi.
Hey, Russ.
I got to say, in the future, maybe it would be a good idea to screen your callers. If somebody's going to try to talk about cannabis, they should have a clue. First of all, if you've got a medical marijuana grow close to your property, nobody's going to show up to steal your lawnmower. They're going to try to steal the weed. And secondly, they do not have lights go on in a dark cycle. It's called light pollution. And if that happens, your cannabis will end up being hermaphrodited. And you will end up being a seed farmer. And the medical grows, sure, they're there, and the recreational grows are there. So is there going to be a glut? Me personally, I think right now there's too many people growing weed, trying to get too much money for it. Quite simply, on the street, an ounce of cannabis is worth between $80 and $140. At the Ontario Cannabis Store, they don't even come near that. So all the cannabis that's available means the same thing that happened in the wine industry. They had so many grapes around the world and so few people drinking wine, they just dumped several hundred tons on the ground. When it comes to cannabis, people won't do that. They'll drop their price. And in case the corporate growers aren't aware of this, the people that are allowed to grow 4 plants, seriously, there's some people, they'll get 4 ounces. However, if you give 4 plants to somebody that's had a backyard vegetable patch all their life, and they're born with a green thumb, they could take those 4 plants and grow 8 pounds. No possible way will they consume those 8 pounds in the year it takes till they're growing their next crop. So, therefore, all this excess cannabis, the governments seriously don't think people are going to throw it away, do they? So they're going to give it away, they're going to sell it. So the corporate growers, there's a need for them. However, canopy growth 2 years ago, $80 a share. Right now, they're crying broke. They're saying they lost $709 million. The only people that could lose money growing weed are either the government, they do it at casinos, they claim a loss. So all the regulations for cannabis are causing such a gross price that people are going to buy it anywhere. Sure, some people will go to the Ontario Cannabis Store. And medicinal growers, the thing is, you talked about designated growers. People don't grow weed for a medical exemptee for nothing. The first thing out of their mouth is, what's in it for me? If you grow for 4 people on your property, you're allowed 4 per address. You get half that crop. So if you're a designated grower and you get half the crop from 4 people with, let's say, 30-gram prescriptions, the 30 grams will allow them 150 plants. Therefore, if you have 4, that's 600 plants. A designated grower can never consume half of the cannabis produced by 600 plants. Where does that cannabis go? Well, me personally, I bought it several times. You buy it from the street. The cannabis that is grown by designated growers does not end up in the hands of licensed producers, very rarely. And last but not least about the corporate growers. When the government decided to regulate cannabis, it makes no sense. They can't regulate beef. We all remember XL Kirkland. We all remember McCain, death by 1,000 cold cuts. We remember Walkerton. I got a can of Campbell's Chunky Clam Chowder. Every potato was black. When I opened the can, it smelled like a dumpster fire. So government regs, when it comes to cannabis, I'll ask this. If the government approved licensed producer has a $10 million crop and it shows a sign of mold, will they use a product called Eagle 20? That is microbutylin. It's been illegal in tobacco since I was born in 1959. So if the tobacco industry doesn't want a mold killer in their tobacco because it's going to kill their consumer too fast, after all, they want nicotine to kill you, not microbutylin. Therefore, Eagle 20 is the go-to product for mold. If you have a $10 million crop at risk of being turned into a pile of jelly, would you risk using a banned substance to save your $10 million bucks? Well, my crop, 4 lights, I harvest about 4 pounds. I see mold, it goes into the garbage. So the corporate grower, they're fighting with legal growers. They're fighting with designated growers. The corporate growers, they're claiming that they're broke. When United States legalizes, there's so many companies that are going to grow cannabis in the States. We cannot think for a minute that our corporate growers are going to get a piece of their action. So if you have a place that grows 1,000 pounds of weed in Fort Erie and another place that grows another 1,000 pounds, how much can the market absorb? I've been around cannabis since 1974, put my first plants in the ground in 75, and honestly, it's the only commodity on the planet that either held its price or it went down in price. A year ago, 2 years ago, a pound of weed was worth $2,000 or more. Right now, a pound of weed is worth between $1,000 and $1,500. I know because when I'm between crops, I'll go buy one. So personally, I would never buy anything from a licensed producer. Quite simply, their prices are gross. Their product is substandard. They use banned substance on a regular basis. You're going to lose 10 million bucks? Give me a break. And the corporate growers, they come into the town and the weed's going to go somewhere else. We have cannabis stores here. The weed comes from somewhere else. The money goes somewhere else. So I say, let the people grow. If you're growing 4 plants or you're growing medicinally, if you get a bumper crop, sell some. And in New York State, they're going to allow the private grower to sell for 3 years with a nominal fee. I say to the city of Fort Erie, where do I sign up? And one more thing about people growing their own cannabis, you know what goes into it. It's kind of like growing your own vegetable patch. You know what goes into it. And as far as regulations go, I'll give you a history lesson on cannabis. The only time cannabis was dangerous to anybody was Richard Nixon using a product called paraquat. He blasted coca fields. He blasted marijuana fields in Mexico, Central America, South America. Paraquat was a herbicide. People still sold the weed. It made people sick, and it was probably the most dangerous thing ever with cannabis. For 100 years, cannabis produced around the world either grew with elephant poo, donkey poo, camel poo, and in some cases, I'm sure monkey poo. Or in Canada now, they're using treated human waste. Me personally, give me something grown with elephant poo. I love that Asian weed. The indicas, they come from Asia. So last but not least, cannabis grown outdoors is a far healthier product. It's got less pathogens. However, if you're near a bean field, being soybean, it produces massive amounts of powder mildew. Therefore, the soybean farmer uses tons of mold killer. If that transfers to your cannabis, it's not healthy. If the powder mildew transfers to cannabis, it decreases your yield tenfold. So in Fort Erie, we have many, many bean fields. So outdoor cannabis on a corporate level is impossible, as I'm sure some city councilor, she learned. All the cannabis that's growing in, hello?
Sorry, Russ. I just wanted to let you know you're at the 9-minute mark. So you'll have
Cool.
just another minute to finish up.
Okay, and in Fort Erie, the people that grow cannabis, they're proud of it. It's literally therapy. I've been a medical exemptee for 15 years, and I encourage everybody, if you've got a malady of any kind, cannabis helps. And if you don't want to get a buzz, you can buy seeds that are CBD. You grow CBD, and it gives you a pile of cannabis. You don't get a buzz, but it does help you feel better. And you can find out how to make tinctures, poultices, mustard, olive oil. There's a million ways to use cannabis. And to this day, I don't know anybody that has ever been hurt or killed over cannabis unless they tried to steal it or they ripped somebody off. So I'm glad you put this out there. But once again, I do believe your caller should be screened for their knowledge of cannabis. And your previous caller, John, seriously, you need to talk more than any person I've ever heard talk. Thanks for everything. Anybody want to ask something?
No, I think we're good. Thanks for those comments, though, and I appreciate you joining us this evening.
Okay.
Great. So we will move on to our next speaker. Thanks very much, Russ. So our next speaker is Eleanor, and I will be bringing her in as panelist. And just as a reminder, like everyone, you will have up to 10 minutes to provide comments or ask any questions.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for taking my call. I just had a couple of questions in regards to the recommendations that are coming forward. My first one is in regards to the studies that are going to be required. For example, the air quality, the environmental, and the lighting. Can you explain specifically what goes into those studies?
I'll probably start with that, and maybe Paul and Suzanne can chip in, but each study would actually be very different depending on the situation or the site plan control requirements. So each lot and each development is different. So there's sort of a standard set of requirements that each of those studies would look at, but it would definitely be more of a case-by-case basis in terms of the actual property that's being developed and, you know, some of the setback requirements and things like that. So it's tough to say that they would, it's tough to give you the exact sort of guidelines for each. There's certainly a specific set of sort of basics that would be required, but it would definitely be a case by case basis, depending again on the type of development, the size, the location, a whole host of other issues. So I don't know if Paul or Suzanne wants to chime in any further. Paul, maybe you've got some thoughts.
Yeah, no, I can add a few more thoughts on that. So to Lindsay's point, for instance, for an odor study, the applicant would have to hire an odor specialist, and there are a number of the air quality specialists. They will assess the building that's being proposed, or either a new building or a retrofit of an existing building. They will look at the proposed ventilation system and filtration system, and they will then indicate whether what the potential for escape of odors and how far those odors will go. As we say, we want no odor escape. Sometimes it happens. That's why we have the 150 meters, but the objective is to have no odor escape. So they'll have to demonstrate that that building and the proposed ventilation and filtration systems address it for that particular building. So as Lindsay says, it's site specific to that building, the size of the facility, the number of plants grown, the amount of odors generated, and the filtration system. Similar would be for a lighting photometric study. They would have to look at what lighting is being proposed, how it's addressed, how it addresses down lighting, how it mitigates lighting off-site. So those are just a couple examples.
Thank you. Just to follow up on the air quality control. So I understand a lot of municipalities are looking at implementing this kind of like site plan control where we have a study being done. But all of the historical data is on the large standard producers, such as the Cannabis or Tilrays or Aurora, which are all like 1 million square feet or larger in canopy space. And so they have millions and millions of plants emitting huge amounts of odor in density wise. Now, if you look at the difference between a standard cultivation versus a micro cultivation, micros are limited to 2,152 square feet of canopy space. And so their emissions are drastically lower. And we've actually been in contact with engineers looking at how air quality differs between standard and micro producers. And the equation doesn't translate into the micro field. Do you have a plan to address this?
Sorry, what do you mean by plan to address it? The studies would be required. The studies would be scoped to the size of the facility, but still the same studies would be applied, whether it's a micro or whether it's a designated grower or it's a larger commercial grower. The same requirements would apply. Different type of studies would be required, but they're still required. There's still requirement for no odor, whether you're micro or large or designated. Still the objective is no odor.
Yes, of course, I completely understand that. But the mitigation techniques that the large standard producers are using are hundreds of thousands, if not over $1 million worth of HVAC equipment. And that's not reasonable to ask of a micro cultivator. And that's not the purpose of the federal government in implementing the micro class licenses. So if you implement a requirement that now we're saying that these micro cultivators have to put in hundreds of thousands of dollars into just HVAC equipment, then like Russ was saying, people are going to be just using the black market and using the medical designation licenses. And then you're forcing people in Fort Erie to go back to the black market, and you're perpetuating the problem.
So Eleanor, the requirement for site plan approval does not say that you have to use a certain ventilation system. What it's saying is that you have to prove whatever ventilation system you use, it produces no outside odor. That's all you have to prove. How
do you prove it without precedent?
You have to show that you're not producing odor.
Yeah, so my question is, people who are starting in the business, and there is no precedent for micro cultivators, there is only precedent for standard, where their only systems for odor mitigation is through these gigantic HVAC systems. What we do, that is true. What are we doing?
Eleanor, please.
smaller family style business, increasing your economy and helping the Fort Ereians to continue their livelihood.
Eleanor, the objective is no outside odor emitted from the plant.
Totally understand that.
You can do that on a small one-room facility. You can ensure through filtration that there's no odor emitted. If it's a large facility, you have a bigger, larger facility, larger ventilation and filtration system. So it will be designed to the size of your facility. You just have to show through a study to demonstrate that there's no outside odor.
How do you demonstrate? So, okay, so this is the problem. We're putting the horse before the carriage before the horse, right? Because in order to build and prove that the systems that have been implemented actually function, we need to actually grow in there. But we can't get site plan approval unless we do a study on something that doesn't have any evidence. It's a difficult question. That's why I'm bringing it up, because a lot of people are going through this and they're switching back to the ACMPR style and perpetuating the illegal black market.
Eleanor, there are hundreds of odor experts out there that can assist you on assessing your facility that's not built yet, but what's proposed in terms of your size of your facility, this type of facility, and your filtration system that's required. It's not that you have to, somebody has to grow first. There are experts out there that can assist you.
Great. Are you guys able to provide that list to assist your citizens in building businesses and developing the economy in your region?
I'll leave that to Lindsay to say whether they'll have a list of experts that can be provided.
I'm not entirely sure through our site plan how they do that, but I do know that generally, we're happy to provide sort of a generic list of experts for each type of study necessary. So it's we don't put precedence on anyone because we obviously don't want to steer you to one consultant over the other. But like I know in terms of other applications, we have a general list of here's folks that are available. There's also Google, just Google who's out there and do your research and see. But Paul's sort of bang on. We're not looking at controlling the type of filtration system that you're using. We're just simply looking at when a site plan application comes in, we want some sort of assurances through an odor study to show that there will be no odor generated from the use. That's all we're looking for. So if that can be achieved in a very simple manner, fantastic. If the study comes back and says, there's other things that have to happen, then that's sort of the way it is. But I agree with what Paul has said, and it's just a matter of finding the consultant and submitting your application. But at the end of the day, we're just looking for no odor being admitted.
And Lindsay, maybe I'll just interrupt and let Eleanor know that there's 1 minute left.
Perfect. Thanks, Mackenzie.
I just have two other notes then. So in regards to the odor, and I'll just spit them out real quick. In regards to the odor, what are your considerations in terms of the Farmers Food Production and Protection Act? And as well, what is your reasoning behind prohibiting outdoor storage, and storage of what?
Outdoor storage is, if I understand, is not permitted under the act. So the legislation doesn't allow you to store outdoors. What we're saying, there's no outdoor growing is permitted because of the potential for odor and the inability to control that odor. We are allowing the agricultural production, but it has to be in a building, so that, in our opinion, is meeting the Farm and Food Protection Act requirements.
Eleanor, that is the end of your 10 minutes. And maybe if time permits at the end, if you have any other questions or comments, we can bring you back in if that's okay.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks. Great, thank you very much, Eleanor. So we do have two more registered speakers at the moment. So we're skipping through a couple of them we're moving on to speaker number 6. And so I'll be bringing in our next registered speaker. And just as a quick reminder, we are giving everybody up to 10 minutes to provide comments or ask any questions, and reminders will be given at the 1 minute and 10-minute mark. And again, if there's any follow-up questions or comments, if time permits, we can invite people back in.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm number 6.
Yes, you are. We it is your
So,
turn to provide comments. if you'd like.
Okay. So as far as I know right now, the legislation for the area is that outdoor growing for business license including the micro and standard cannabis license, right? Outgrow is not allowed, and we have kind of facilities which is greenhouse or warehouse or barn, whichever we have to grow inside to eliminate the odor. Am I right? My understanding. Okay, so if it's only regulation for the business, so but for the personal license, personal 100 or even 500, depends on how many milligrams there are regulations. If that is true, I do. And how is that fair for people? For people like us, we apply, spend like to apply the micro standard. We spend like tens of thousands to apply for the license, and also have to build up the facilities. We cannot grow outside. Grow outside is the cost effective. And what's the difference of
Sorry, just to let you know, we are having a
and
bit
the
of a
personal
connection issue.
license? We can grow. You cannot hear me, right?
We can hear you. You keep cutting in and out. We get some bits and parts of your questions and comments.
So, okay, so for the personal license, people can grow the marijuana outside, marijuana up to 500, like 400 something. That's what I know. Cannabis. And there is no regulation that they have to grow outside. They can grow inside or outside if it is a personal cannabis license for medical reasons.
It can grow.
But for if
Lee, just
for the areas that, oh, I cannot hear it. Sorry.
Lee, just
Sorry, I cannot hear it.
can you hear us?
Yeah, it's cutting in and out. Yes. Sorry about that. Oh.
So Lee, just to clarify, personal use, you can grow 4 plants, not irrespective of medical. Anybody can grow 4 plants indoor or outdoor on their property.
You can grow 4 plants, but with medical, with doctor's prescription, personal license, they can grow up to 300 indoor, but 100, sometimes 100 outdoor. That is personal, like for medical reasons. They can up to 100 outdoor. If people who have personal medical license, they can grow outdoor for like 100 cannabis. So for micro, right, why we have to, like if I apply right now, I'm in the process of apply for micro license, spend hundreds of dollars in the application. After that, I spend $1,000 to build the greenhouses, eliminate the orders, and go through all of this like even to apply for the license, there are so many barriers for us to get it. After that, we have so many requirements and specification to meet at the Fort Erie. So I will not go to the micro license. I will just I just apply for personal cannabis license. Fort Erie does not have registration for another thing, like people are talking about for micro and business license, the older, like if you have a farm, like a 50 acres above, the farm is so big, there's no way people around can smell that license. If you have a 10-acre farm, yes, I do agree. There are some older around neighbors, but if it's a 50 acres farm in the middle, you have like 300 cannabis grow to smell the odor. Why we have to put the odor, spend thousands of dollars on the HVAC or whatever odor elimination system? Why? Shouldn't the consideration about the sum it is?
So Lee, the legislation, to be able to get your license from the federal government, you have to prove that you will not emit an odor. And that is what we're following up. That is the legislation. You're not allowed to emit any odor. So that's why we're requiring a study to prove that you are not emitting an odor. So for any commercial operation, big or small, the same would apply.
I do agree, micro and standard, you can apply for outdoor growing business license. Right? For outdoor, they do micro. So if I have a farm like 50 acres, how could my neighbor smell it outside of the 50 acres?
Oh,
that
well,
is one question. If I have a 10 acre, I do, you know, I think I can smell it, right? I can notice what happens on that farm. But if I have a 50 acres, right, farm, like you cannot even see. If I have like 200 cannabis inside, you cannot even see. There's no smell. When you pass by, you cannot smell anything. That's why, like, when I apply for the micro license, the Fort Erie said I have to apply for indoor license, but like Health Canada said that I can grow even with micro, I can apply for outdoor license. But Fort Erie said no. The only Fort Erie said no because I think that I have spent thousands of dollars to build the facilities. Cost for small business, it's a lot of cost, overhead cost. And another thing is that about the hemp. Does Fort Erie know the difference between the hemp and the cannabis? And between the hemp and the marijuana? If I have hemp license, hemp is agricultural, it's a plant, right? It looks like cannabis, but it is not. And in the future, it's going to provide clean resource. Like it is a much, it absorbs 40%. It absorbed the water absorption rate is 40% more than the other, like liter, if you use that for liter. And it uses 60% less water to grow hemp than cotton. If this is like a green plant, if I grow hemp, I can grow any acres. Does Fort Erie distinguish? That is another question. Hemp as agricultural, you know, like plant from marijuana, which is like has some THC or CBDs. Hemp is just a plant for fiber. They can use hemp they can use a fiber from hemp to build the concrete, to build the building material, which is like how many stronger than steel? Which is like 70% stronger than steel. United States is already have mass production of hemp, allow farmers to grow hemp.
Hi, just to let you know, you are at the 9-minute mark. So we are
in the farm, and when people grow hemp, the hemp will eliminate the toxins in the soil. It is like the root of the soybean. And I have so many questions, like why Fort Erie put so many barriers in front of the small business farmers and micro cannabis production or even hemp site. I am finished.
great. Thank you very much. So with that, we will move on to our last registered speaker for the evening. So our last registered speaker is speaker number 8, Mike. And just as a reminder, we're providing up to 10 minutes for you to ask any questions or provide comments, and reminders will be given at the 1-minute mark and when your 10 minutes is up. So I will now bring you in as a panelist. Hi, Mike, are you able to hear us?
Sorry, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I didn't register as a speaker. I just kind of listened to the meeting.
Sorry, the volume's a little low on your end. Are you able to hear us okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just having a little trouble hearing you. It's a little bit muffled.
Okay. I didn't register as a speaker. Thank you for the opportunity.
Sorry, Mike, we're still unable to hear you. It's very muffled. We do have a call-in option if you'd like. The email that I sent you would have some phone numbers and a webinar ID to put in if that would be.
I can't find any. Oh, I'm sorry. We can't seem to get the. Can you hear me at all?
We can hear you very slightly. It's quite muffled though.
Okay, thanks anyways. Okay, sorry. Can't get it to work.
If you'd like to try one of the phone numbers in the email, you can call just from your landline or cell phone, and then we'll be able to hear that. We will be on till 7 o'clock, so if you want to check that out in the email on how to join via telephone, then we'll certainly keep an eye out for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
All right.
Okay, so that is all of our registered speakers for now. I'll keep an eye out to see if Mike's able to come back in. And we haven't had any other speakers come in since we started. So did we want to open the floor back up for follow-up questions? I do see a couple of hands up from Councillor Luberts and Eleanor. So maybe I will start with Councillor Luberts. I will bring you in as a panelist.
Okay, thanks, Mackenzie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Yeah, just to, I'm just wondering if we could get back to Ms. Wang. And I think that I didn't hear much of what she was asking, right? And I'm wondering if she can email us. And then I'm wondering also if we can see what her questions were and the response to her questions, right? But one of the things that she was saying about was with the licensing. And then she, her question, I think, was, why is Fort Erie, you know, and when she comes to Fort Erie, you know, she has to do certain things. And if I'm not wrong, or you can correct me if I am wrong, I thought that when the federal government was looking at licenses, and I know myself being an electrician, when it comes to legislation and rules and policies and bylaws, you can perform work or do certain things, but it also says that you have to comply with local municipal policies and bylaws. So if we have those policies and bylaws in place, although you get a license from the federal government to operate, I think it says in the license that you still have to comply with the local municipalities. Is that correct? So that might answer a little bit of her question as far as why she might be able to apply for one thing, but in the town of Fort Erie, you won't be able to do that because we have our own policies. And then getting into the previous regulations, when this whole thing started with the town of Fort Erie, we were discussing, and the first thing that became legal and the first thing that we dealt with was medical marijuana. So when we got those applications for medical marijuana, I'm curious as to how those applications were allowed to segue into recreational marijuana growth, because they were specific to medical marijuana. And I think we need to answer that question as to how we're allowing it to segue into something different without applying for an application, or, you know, filling an application and applying for a different license, completely different license under completely different regulations. So I'm curious to see how that happened, because I personally don't agree with it. If you're going to apply for medical marijuana, you apply for medical marijuana, we'll deal with that license. Now, if you want to change it to recreational, then it's a new application. Then it's a new process. You have to follow the same process. But I'm just hoping that you guys recognize that. And with filtration, I know somebody was asking about, I think it was the second to last speaker. She was asking about, I'm not quite sure what she was looking for, but how do we know that the odor won't be emitted? And from my understanding, if I have a grow room in my basement, I can take the square footage and work that square footage, put that into to the people that sell the filtration system, and they will tell me, this is what you need, this is how much air you're going to have in that room, and you want to circulate that air every so many minutes, right? And I don't know that you need to do it when it's black. I think you need to do it when the light is on, so that the plant is getting the air, it's getting the oxygen, it's getting the carbon dioxide, getting everything. And so those things are done, from what I understand, and you just give your supplier that information, and they'll let you know what system, what size filtration you need, how many cubic meters per minute that you're going to circulate through your filtration system, and the end result is no odor, or minimal odor that, you know, we're going to probably put in our legislation or our policy or our bylaw that will be permitted. So and from what I understand also is there are some plants that you can purchase that smell a different way. Instead of having that skunk smell, for instance, I'm told that there's someone that has a plant that emits an odor of watermelon. And so his backyard smells like a watermelon. Now, don't know how much truth there is into that. I haven't smelt it, but something that we need to look into. And lastly, the cross-pollination and different chemicals that can be used and different chemicals that you might be exposed to. And are we looking into this in this study, in this exercise, as to what chemicals are used for other plants? And if those chemicals will be introduced to a marijuana plant. For instance, we all know, even with marijuana, we have a short growth season. So we need to fertilize and give them nutrients, fertilize the plants, feed them nutrients, get the best yield that you can get out of your plant. They do the same thing with other plants, particularly corn. So they put growth inhibitors into a corn plant to make it grow faster. And what if that gets into the marijuana? Is this part of the study? Are we looking at other chemicals that might get introduced to a marijuana plant? Now, I know you're saying we're going to grow indoors, but we have an application, like you said, on Lower Road, where they're going to be grandfathered in, and they're going to be growing outdoors in a greenhouse, and they're going to be exposed to chemicals because I know they're surrounded by soybeans. And what are we looking at? What part of this study is going to look at that and say, well, this isn't going to be acceptable, or to let the grower know that you're going to be subjected to these chemicals? Because heaven forbid that a marijuana grower comes and says, well, you gave me the permits to grow in Fort Erie, and now the soybean grower is contaminating my crop. Now what? Who's responsible? Do we go to the soybean grower and say, well, you can't introduce that chemical to your plants? Or do we tell the marijuana grower that, well, that's you have to mitigate that, because we know that these situations are there, and these things are going to come to us as a municipality, and we need to make sure we're not going to get ourselves into trouble over it.
Councilor, I can just address that last point. My understanding is the federal government regulates what pesticides can be used on cannabis. And for a local municipality, there is nothing you can do to regulate what pesticides are used in agricultural production. That would be a bylaw infringement of an agricultural operation. Same with cannabis, same with soybeans being grown adjacent to wheat or corn. If there's any cross-pollination, cross issues of pesticides, herbicides being used, there's nothing the local municipality can do to control that.
But the grower, when they get there, like the gentleman or the group that's on Lower Road, they understand that? Because their application is medical marijuana. From what I understand, medical marijuana, there's no pesticides that are approved for medical marijuana. So if they get contaminated with a soybean fertilizer or soybean pesticide, their crop is going to be worthless. Do they understand that?
Lindsay, you might want to talk about that, because I'm not dealing with it.
I don't really know the answer to that, Don. All that I know is that we can't regulate what pesticides people use on any crop. So whether that's cannabis, whether that's tomatoes, we don't have the ability as a municipality to do that. I agree with Paul, and that's sort of been my understanding as well, that the federal government in terms of cannabis does regulate the type of pesticide that they're able to use. These commercial growers are growing to sell to licensed retailers. So it's very similar to how the liquor store would work. And I don't think that they control the pesticides that are on grapes. So I don't know the answer to that. I just know that the municipality really, from my understanding of the planning tools that we have available, does not have the ability to regulate the type of pesticides that people are using on their crops.
Lindsay, we are at about 11 minutes now, and we do have a couple of other participants that would like to come back in.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. No, just as long as we're going to address, the situation. And I'm really curious about the previous regulations. I don't know how we segued into this, but we got to keep it separate. Medical marijuana and recreational should be separate applications.
Thanks, Don.
Great. So as I mentioned, I do see that we have a couple more attendees that would like to come back in. So I'll bring back Eleanor at this time. And again, we will be keeping to that 10-minute limit, just as we do have a few more people that would like to speak.
Thanks, Mackenzie. I just wanted to quickly clarify Dawn's question there about medical versus recreational cannabis. Under the new cannabis regulations and Cannabis Act, cannabis is just cannabis now. It is not distinguished between medical versus recreational. It's up to the buyer who buys the cannabis, whether it's a large producer or if it's the customer themselves, to determine whether that cannabis will be used medically or as a recreational product. I also wanted to clarify, there was a point made about federal license holders complying with municipal laws. And I just did a quick search, and that actually only applies to the destruction of cannabis, and that's section 43 and 146 in the cannabis regulations. So it says that cannabis producers must comply with federal, municipal, and provincial laws in regards to the destruction of cannabis. We also have to notify the municipality that of the intent to apply for a cannabis license, but that's the extent. I did have a question for you guys.
Sorry, I would like to respond to that just quickly, if that's okay. I've personally spoken to Health Canada on this matter, and they have confirmed that it is the applicant's responsibility to meet all municipal laws, including municipal zoning bylaw. So,
oh yes, of course. Like you have to get a zoning attestation, make sure that you're in the proper zone. You can't just put yourself anywhere. I'm not saying that. I'm more saying like it's like specific in the federal laws. That's what it says, and we were a little bit more broader in the conversation there with Dawn, so I wanted to clarify. I had a question, and I think I missed this in the presentation, but what do you define accessory sales as?
So currently the definition, I believe the term under Fort Erie zoning bylaw is factory outlet, and it's a defined term which describes the permission for accessory for sales, and I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but essentially it's for sale of product produced on the site. And I believe there might be a size requirement of that area to be permitted for sales. So that's what I was referring to as the defined term. And sorry, Lindsay, if you wanted to add to that.
Nope, that's exactly it. So thank you. That's perfect.
Okay, so from my understanding, that would fall within the definition of a farm gate retail license under the provincial government, because if you're selling cannabis that was produced on site.
No, Lindsay, sorry, no, Eleanor. It falls under the zoning for industrial areas.
Right, but the permission, like as a factory outlet, where you produce something within that factory and can sell it from the factory, that would be the farm gate retail definition under the AGCO.
Oh, you're talking about the provincial requirement to be able to sell cannabis?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Okay. you have anything? So I do have a micro cultivation site that is in operation, licensed by both Health Canada and the CRA. And we have actually had some city officials out here from multiple municipalities within the region. And we would like to further extend the offer for yourself to come out and use this site as a live active test site for all of the bylaws that you'd like to implement in your town. We think that it would provide a lot of evidence to different kinds of systems that are being implemented in terms of odor, security, light. I know traffic sometimes comes up, and environmental impact.
Okay, thanks for that, Eleanor. We may take you up on that offer. I don't know, but appreciate the extension of the invite.
No problem. Happy to help. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Great. So it doesn't look like we have anyone else with their hands up at this time.
I would just like to say, John, I know you're still here, and I want to apologize for Russ. I think his comment was very inappropriate, and I just wanted to let you know that it wasn't okay, and we're going to be dealing with that. So I do apologize.
Thanks, Lindsay. So maybe at this time, I'll just open up the floor one last time for anyone who has any follow-up questions. If you'd, oh, perfect. Actually, I see Ms. Wang is raising her hand, so I will bring her back in. Hopefully we do have better connection. And if not, I did want to let everyone know that we do have emails and can follow up certainly to get those comments via email or telephone.
Hello, I hope you can hear me this time better.
It's cutting in and out a little bit, but
Can you hear me?
we'll do our best to follow along. And as I mentioned, perhaps you can give Lindsay a call sometime later this week and maybe reiterate some of your comments just in case you miss anything.
Okay, I would love to talk with someone like in person or even through the phone. And the site that we have is 2524 Winger Road, which is farmland. Right now, we're in the process of applying for the micro license. So we have a lot of questions regarding this site. If we can connect with someone to clarify all the questions in the process, that would be great.
Sure, that's no problem at all. We can sort of coordinate between staff in town hall and see who is probably best to answer your questions, but we can certainly coordinate that. And I do have your email as well, so I'm happy to reach out that way. And if you do have questions or comments that you can sort of give us an idea of what answers you're looking for, if you want to send me an email with sort of those questions, that would be awesome.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Great, so that looks like that's everyone at the moment. I do see Eleanor has her hand up again, and maybe I'll bring her back in briefly, and I'll just keep an eye out in case we have anybody else in, and then we'll go from there.
Hi, sorry guys, I realized I missed one of my questions. It's just a quick one. It's about the outdoor storage. I understand, there's no outdoor storage of cannabis material, but is the recommendation to prohibit like any outdoor like storage of anything, racking, lighting, what I'm talking about?
Suzanne, you want to address that?
Yes, that is what the current provision is. That's based on a number of similar provisions we have seen in a number of different other municipalities within the region and within Ontario. But I understand that what you're asking, so that's something that we can look at a little bit further and consider, because I agree with you that the outdoor storage of cannabis itself is not permitted anyways. So you're correct.
Yeah, I know I've seen a lot of municipalities implementing this line in their bylaws, but it's not actually based on any evidence other than, prohibiting storage of cannabis outside, which is already prohibited by the federal government. So I just wanted to make sure we weren't being discriminated against in terms of outdoor storage just because of the sole fact that we're a cannabis company, when we have lots of other factors and lots of other businesses are allowed to store things outside.
Well, thank you for your comment. We'll look at that.
Thank you so much.
All right, so maybe I'll give one last call for if there's anyone who has any follow-up questions, you can indicate that to us by raising your virtual hand. I think everyone has done so tonight, so I know everyone, I don't have to give the instructions because everyone knows, but I'll just give a moment. And then if there's no follow-up, then I will pass it along to you, Lindsay. So I'm not seeing any follow-up hands.
Perfect. Okay, so do we want to then just, we'll put the presentation up. Our meeting does go until 7. So if there are any other sort of comments or questions, we'll be monitoring. And again, feel free to raise your hand if you do have a question. We're all going to still be here to do what we need to do. But Mackenzie is going to put up the presentation. It's just on a loop. So if you're watching on YouTube, that's all you're going to see. It's not very exciting. Well, I mean, it is exciting. It's a great presentation, but you probably only need to see it once. And then, yeah, if there are any further questions or comments, feel free to, again, raise that virtual hand. But turn it over to Mackenzie.
Great, thanks. So like Lindsay mentioned, I'll be sharing my screen and getting the presentation going. And as she mentioned, we will all be here. So if you'd like, raise your virtual hand and we'll be waiting for you. Thanks. So I see that, oh, actually, no, Councillor Luberts, I saw your hand up. If you have any other questions, let me know. Oh, it looks like it's back up. Excellent. So let me stop sharing my screen. And if everyone's available, I will bring Councillor Luberts back in.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you can go back Can we do that? Can you go back to the first or second slide you put up? We're talking about land use. There was a question in there. Can you do that?
Yeah, sure. Suzanne, did you want me to do that or did you want to bring it up on your end?
If it's whatever's easiest.
I'm 65 years old. I'm not that savvy.
I can bring it up on my end.
All right.
Let's see. Let me know when we're there, Councillor Luberts. Was it a little further down?
First, go to the first slide. I think, well, next one, I mean, yeah. Next one. So when we, we hired a consultant to bring forward these recommendations, right? Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct, Don.
And the personal growth, well, that was outside the outside of the scope, so they didn't talk about personal, recreational.
That's correct. If you're growing up to, I believe it's 4 plants, you don't need a license from Health Canada. So there is very, very little, if not anything, that we can do to regulate that. So it's just permitted as if somebody wants to plant sunflowers, they can do it. If they want to plant 4 cannabis plants, they can. So there's really no regulation that we can implement in that regard. So that was outside the scope of the study.
Now, most of this, what I'm looking at and what I'm seeing most of the time when we're talking about the cultivation, we're talking about commercial cultivation as someone that's going to take a plant and grow a plant and then have a product that they can sell. And when Russ Young was speaking about, you know, you're going to grow more marijuana than you can use. So 4 plants, the average person probably can't smoke even 2 pounds a year. But I don't see anything in any of the recommendations or any of the study as to the sale of cannabis plants, for instance, clones. So now here's an example. Somebody grows marijuana in their basement or in their home, right, under the proper lighting and proper ventilation and everything. You're probably going to grow more than you need. But the guy can grow recreational marijuana in his backyard. Is there going to be any provision for that person to sell the clones? Because you can sell the clones for about $10 a piece, maybe up to 20, depending on the quality. And I don't see anything there. Are we going to even look at that as possible under sales?
It certainly was not within the scope of the study. And again, I don't think that there's any regulations that we can put into place. And Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, or Suzanne, essentially at that point, you're simply selling a plant. You're not selling.
Yeah, because at that point, the plant is nothing. All it is a plant.
Exactly.
There's- It hasn't produced any THC, hasn't produced, it's useless.
Correct.
The municipalities do not have the authority to regulate any retail sale of anything associated with cannabis. It's all the provincial authority. So you can say whether you're going to allow retail sales, and you can opt out of retail sales or opt in, and then it's the municipality that will then regulate. It's the province that will regulate who gets to sell, and then they have to abide by your zoning.
So do you know of anything in the provincial laws that talks about just selling a cloned plant?
Suzanne, do you know? I'm not aware of anything.
No, since sales wasn't really the focus of our study, that's not something that we looked into at the provincial level.
Okay. Okay, thanks. I was just curious as to. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. And Mackenzie, Signe had noted if we sort of don't have any other further questions or anything that we can actually shut her down now if we want. So if we don't see any other hands, we'll give people a couple of minutes. I don't know who's even left.
Yeah, we have Eleanor left and she does have her hand up. So
Okay,
maybe
great.
we'll
Perfect.
wrap up with Eleanor this evening.
Okay, sounds great. Awesome. Hey, Eleanor, welcome back.
Lindsay, I can actually answer Dawn's question. So if someone grows in their basement and sells it, whether it is a flowering plant or a baby, it's illegal. It's cannabis all the same. So you have to have a cultivation license, whether it's a micro, a standard, or a nursery, in order to sell plants. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't. I wasn't sure what the rules were around that, so that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so I think that's everyone this evening, Lindsay. You're just muted, Lindsay, sorry.
Sorry. If that is it, and there are sort of no more questions and no more hands up, then I think we can probably wrap this up for the evening. I'd just like to thank everyone for participating. There was some really good discussion and some good comments. I've learned some new things, which is always great. I'd like to invite everyone to feel free to follow up with me directly if you do have any other questions or comments about the study. And please remember to visit Let's Talk Fort Erie, a final plug for the website for more information. There is a second survey, so make sure to check that out and fill that out if you can. Again, I'd like to thank Mackenzie for keeping us organized, and Paul and Suzanne for joining us and helping to answer some questions tonight. So again, as long as there's no more hands up, I will say good night. Please continue to stay safe and healthy, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yeah, great. I'm not seeing anyone else with their hands up.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And like I said, have a great rest of the night.